very warm welcome, a special welcome to the trustees of the Aspen Institute, the Executive Committee or International Committee. I see a lot of friends out here from the committee, so welcome to all of you. We are also very delighted to have with us representatives from Aspen Institutes around the world. Welcome to them as well. And I also welcome members of the Board of Trustees of the Aspen Institute India, Ambassador Lamba, Minister Singh, Shashi, Mr. Jamshed Godrej, Naina Lal Kirwai, Mr. Nainan joining us this evening. I'd like to take 2 minutes to just give you a little snapshot of what we do in Aspen, India. We focus on 3 different areas of work. The first work deals with foreign policy, where the Aspen India runs a number of track 2 dialogues with different governments around the world, the US, China, Japan, Singapore, Israel. And we also run a track 2 dialogue in a tripartite with the US, Japan, and India. And it is track 2 for the very reason that we're able to have very free and frank discussions and get a lot of issues that need resolved off the table, so that 2 different governments can actually work towards getting them resolved on the table. The second thing that we do is we run a program very similar to the Henry Crown Fellow Program out of the Aspen Institute USA, called the Indian Leadership Initiative. In the ILI, we deal with young people who have tasted quite a bit of success by the age of 35 in whatever field of life, walk of life they've chosen. It's a very wide spectrum, from government, NGO, police, army, the administrative services, to business, industry, art, media, culture. And we take them through the Aspen's value-based leadership learning process through a pedagogy and a methodology that Aspen has developed over the years. We are right now in the beginning of our 4th class of fellows. So by the end of the 4th class, we should have 100 of these fellows out there, and hopefully, if you take the theory of concentric circles, they should influence at least 1,000 others and 1,000 others, and so on and so forth. And the third program we've started is a very interesting program. We've started this year for the first time, where we've actually taken the concept of the value-based learning down to the high school level. And we actually ran for the first time a program with 15 to 18-year-olds based on a very similar structure, but it's a 2-week compressed program. And we had children, boys and girls from the age of 15 to 18 from high schools around the country. We took them away to an off-site up in the mountains in the middle of May. I was a bit surprised that they actually wanted to go anywhere at 44-degree heat. But the program was a resounding success. And we believe the program is very scalable, and we've started now looking for funding and looking for other schools and other opportunities to that. So that's the 3 areas that we really focus on. Some of the things that we have done is we have had, for example, the Prime Minister of Singapore come and speak in an open dialogue at an Aspen Institute hosted functions. We've had other global leaders come and do that, just to make sure that the foreign policy and the decision-making establishment within the framework of this country actually gets to have a chance to interact with its people. It's actually a great pleasure to actually have the International Committee here, because I believe one of the trustees has a very important announcement to make. So may I ask Margot Pritzker, the chair of the Leadership Initiatives Committee of the Aspen Institute, to please come up.
But I am the mother of sons, so I tend to have a good voice. Okay, that makes it even better. Thank you. It's a great honor to stand here before you. My name is Margot Pritzker. I am a trustee of the Aspen Institute, and I chair the leadership committee of the Aspen Institute. And so we're very delighted to be here with our partner, Aspen India. and to announce today the winner of the John P. McNulty Prize. The McNulty family decided some 5 years ago now to give a prize to the best project amongst the fellows. And there is always a wealth of nominees who come forward, and we whittle this down to 5 nominees. And then there is an international jury comprised of Madeleine Albright, your own Shashi Tharoor, Laura Tanu, and Anne Welsh McNulty. And it is my great pleasure, because I've known him from the beginning, of your wonderful program, the India Leadership Initiative. It is Amit Bhatia.
May I request Dr. Tharoor, Mr. Walter Isaacson, and Kiran, could you also join Margot and Mr. Thakur on stage, please?
Thank you. And if I may, before we invite Amit up here for a round of applause, just to say that one of the wonderful things about Amit's program, Aspire, that has really introduced 50,000, and I think more than that, into training people for the workforce in your vigorous economy and democracy here. He didn't do this alone, and he's the first one to say this. And so let me read the people from the India Leadership Initiative who teamed up with Amit to do this. And forgive me if my pronunciation isn't quite correct. Let me do that quickly, because I have their names. So his very close friend and India Leadership Initiative Fellow, Karandeep Singh, plus India Leadership Fellows, Shivinda Mohan Singh, Prashant Khemka, Karti Chindabaram, Sandeep Patel, Jesse Lenchna, and Sanjay Chabara.
By the way, this is a very big deal, and I hope everybody is proud of Amit and the India Leadership Initiative. It's the first time it has been for somebody from India, but this is the biggest prize we give, so it's a great honor.
And the presentation, the formal presentation that will be done by the McNulty family will be done in New York in November, and although everybody can't make it by then, it is a big celebration, and you will hear about that in press and other related articles. Thank you.
Just thank you very much. The fact that all of you are here makes it even special, and I want to thank all the fellows who supported me in this. So thank you all very much.
Maybe request
Yeah, absolutely.
Isaacson, Dr. Tharoor, Mr. Thakur.
I have a long resume of the two gentlemen on the stage, but frankly speaking, I think it's pointless going through it because I think everybody here knows everything they've achieved. So, if you don't mind, gentlemen, can we go straight into the conversation? Mike?
I will do a Henry Kissinger line, which is when somebody did that to him and said, he's a man who needs no introduction. Dr. Kissinger said, I may be somebody who needs no introduction, but there's nobody who likes an introduction more than I do.
I mean, sometimes people tend to say, it may not be an introduction, but boy, he needs a conclusion. That's not said about us. Walter, it's great to have you here, and
It's great to be with you.
we have not rehearsed this. So what I wanted to ask Walter about a number of things that I thought might be of interest to the group. He's being told by Kiran that focus ought to be more on Steve Jobs because of his recent book being of interest to people. I am conscious though that Walter's doing a separate talk in your program tomorrow on that. So while I think we should talk about that book, I'd also like to broaden it a bit to Walter's other well-known interests. But let's start on Steve Jobs, because that really has been a a monumental bestseller. You really, I believe it's beaten all conceivable records for a biography.
Well, it may have, but I do know it's about Steve Jobs, not about me. It'd be like Boswell going around thinking that he broke all records for writing about Dr. Johnson. I know people are interested in Steve Jobs.
Because you spent, I believe, 40 interviews, is that right? With
Yeah,
him?
and some of it was, day-long interviews, walking around with him. And it was a really amazing opportunity, because as a writer and as a biographer, you very rarely get to get up close in an intimate way with somebody who's had such an effect, putting a dent in history. And it was like peeling back layers. The first year or so, he was a little bit guarded, because he's a very private person. But by the end, he was, it was almost like you peeled away certain layers. And I found him to have a very intense personality, which made it strong too. And of course, it was a year ago this week that he died, so that's an emotional overlay. He was somebody who at times was rough on people, tough, petulant, but I came to like him and truly admire him. So the whole thing was quite emotional.
Walter, since we're sitting in New Delhi, I think I'm going to fulfill my curiosity, and perhaps those of the other Indians here, about his famous or notorious year in India as a young man.
Yeah, at age 17 or 18, he drops out, runs away, drops out of college, and comes to India looking for the Maharaji, who had just died. So Steve is trying to find his own spiritual leader. And he was deeply moved for his entire life by the year he spent in India. First of all, he was penniless, so he sort of walked from village to village. Secondly, he became a great disciple of Eastern religions and a belief that the journey is the reward and that he had to be part of something larger than himself. He also, I think, learned in India, as he put it, the power of intuition. He said that when he lived in the United States, he learned the power of, working?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Of Western rational thought. But that coming to India, he learned the power of intuition, of experiential wisdom, of having a sense of beauty and the connection of that beauty to technology or science. And that was really the theme of his life, which was connecting a sense of spiritual beauty, a sense of intuitive feel for design with the scientific and the technical. He loved his time in India.
Did it give him a sort of spiritual dimension thereafter?
Yeah, it was a year ago when he was very, very ill. He still thought he might beat the cancer. But I asked him that. We were talking about India, we were talking about what he learned there. And I said to him, as he was sort of curled up and feeling very sick, I said, do you still believe in the spiritual lessons you learned in India? That after you die, perhaps something lives on, that your experiential knowledge lives on, that there's some incarnation of your spirit that will continue. And he said to me, yes, most of the time I believe that. I like to believe that when you're gone, something in you, the experiential wisdom that you've accumulated, lives on in some incarnation, or your spirit lives on. And then he looked at me, and he sort of did a back take, and he said, but sometimes I'll worry that it's just like an on-off switch. You know, you die and click, you're gone. And I was kind of taken aback. I mean, I sure didn't say anything. I just looked at him. And he gave me that half smile that Steve Jobs used to give. He said, maybe that's why I didn't like to put on-off switches on Apple devices. So, He also believed that simplicity was the ultimate sophistication and focus. That was both from his Zen Buddhist training, but also his Eastern spiritual training that came from India. He was able, you know, speaking of on-off switches, I mean, when he did the iPod, he just kept saying, simplify it, simplify it. There are a lot of other MP3 music players, but they were also brain dead and complicated. You could figure out how to put your music in, you know, get to the song you wanted. And he said, I don't want an instruction manual. I just want a beautiful white box that has 1,000 songs in your pocket, and you get to any song you want in 3 clicks. And they kept showing him new ways of doing it. And finally, they got that track wheel that was so simple. And he said it reminded me of the spiritual simplicity that was at the core of what he learned in India. And he loved it, but he said, when they showed it, he said, what's this? Actually, he used a stronger word between what and is this. But, and he pointed to the button on top, and they said, well, you know, they were a little nervous. They knew he knew what it was. Finally, somebody said, well, Steve, that's the on-off switch. And he pauses and he says, what does it do? And they're a little taken aback because they know he knows what it does. They finally say, Steve, it turns it on and off. And he says, why do we need it? And it dawns on them that you don't really need a big on-off switch on an iPod. If you quit using it, it'll power itself down. If you start using it again, it knows how to power itself back up. And it was that type of simplicity, and that ties into what he had said at the end about not liking on-off switches. But anything that was a distraction, anything that took you out of a real sense of spiritual beauty, he hated.
Interesting. I mean, one of the things that troubled me about his life, I mean, you mentioned already that he's been difficult with people, and I think we might want to hear a little bit about that. But one of the things that troubled me is he himself was an adopted child, right? He was born to a pair of graduate students. His father was a Syrian who went on to be a professor, adopted by the Jobs family, grew up with all of that, discovered his biological parents in his late 20s. And yet when he himself had a child out of wedlock, he refused to acknowledge her for very many years. What's the background? How could you explain that, and how does he explain?
Well, and he has the child at the exact same age his father was, 23, when his father had Steve. One of the things you learn when you write biography is it's all about dad. Everybody, there's something about the father that is the key. And that for Steve, it happened to him, and he does it. As his girlfriend, the mother of that child, said, he who is abandoned becomes an abandoner. And that was, in her mind, at the core of what Steve was. Steve was very tough in that way. He did not, even though he had sort of a spiritual bonding with humanity, he had trouble with individual intimacies.
And then in the end, he did acknowledge the child later?
Oh, yeah, he acknowledges Lisa Brennan Jobs, who his child, and they have a relationship. She's at his bedside a year ago when he died. Steve always had a way of getting to the right answer, but taking a while and being kind of impatient and impetuous and believing the rules didn't apply to him before he got there. I mean, it even happens with the cancer. I mean, he won't acknowledge that he has cancer. He spends months thinking he can treat it with just a vegan diet. And then he finally, it kicks in and he acknowledges it, and he gets the most scientifically advanced treatment. He has the DNA sequenced of his cancer, his own genome sequenced, he has molecular targeted therapy. So Steve always had this tension between the counterculture rebel side that believes the rules don't apply to him, and if I don't want something to be, I'll just will it away. They called it the reality distortion field, those who worked for him. And then on the other side, the very cold, smart, scientific, pragmatic person.
Did his failure to acknowledge the cancer cost him in the long term, or?
We don't know. By the time they operated on it, it had spread to his liver. What you'll never know is, had they operated on 6 months earlier, would it have spread?
My gosh. Let's go back to his career. We all know about the founding of Apple and the computers. Tell us about that first firing by Apple. When Apple fired him as CEO.
Oh, once again, the theme of abandonment is a tough part of his life. But he creates this company in his parents' garage with the kid down the street, Steve Wozniak. And he creates the most beautiful of all machines, the original Macintosh. It looks like a human face with that little smile. And it is a machine that transforms the computer industry by making people realize, I can take this home. I can play with it. It's not something that the Pentagon and corporations have. It's a home computer. So it transforms things. But Steve is, as I said, and is in the book, not the easiest manager in the world. And when things start going sour, including some of the profits, the fact that Microsoft copied the Apple operating system with Windows and licensed it around, Apple is going down. He has a board of directors that are all hand-appointed by him, and they're all father figures almost. Arthur Rock, the venture capitalist, Mike Markkula. And he's brought in this other father figure, a guy named John Scully, who'd run PepsiCo. And they're all there, and they get together, and they fire him. And he said it was like being abandoned for the second time. Of course, not only is this one of the great creation myth stories of a kid who starts a company in his parents' garage and turns it into the most valuable company in the history of the planet, but it's also a great restoration drama because they fire him, and 12 years later, a lot of people on the same board have to come back to him and bring him back as the CEO.
How come they did that? That resurrection is interesting because he'd actually not been a huge success when the 12 years outside Apple, had he?
He had not been a great success outside of Apple, but he had created a new operating system, which is something Apple wasn't able to do. So Apple needed to buy the operating system of Next Computer. And as Gil Amelio, and Steve Wozniak actually had the line, his partner, was, you buy Next, you get Steve. And so Steve came back. I think that he had matured, and Apple was just taking a gamble, but they did need him back, and boom, he transforms the company from bankruptcy to the most valuable company.
So why couldn't he do that earlier as a younger man?
Well, the good thing about writing biographies is they're all a journey. They're all a learning experience. A guy starts off, a guy makes a whole lot of mistakes, a guy doesn't know how to treat people. Steve did not learn everything. Even at the end of his life, he still had some of the flaws he had at the beginning. But he learned a lot, and he had learned focus, for example. When he gets fired at Apple, Steve had always said that if you want to make a great company, you have to make really great products. And the mistake business people make is they decide they want to make a profit, not make a great product. And when you try to emphasize profits and you put a priority on profits, you'll cut corners in the products you make. You'll try to see if you can maximize profit. But if you care about making really great products, the profits will tend to follow. So when he goes and he's kicked out, Apple does exactly what he fears. They jack up the prices, and they start milking whatever money they can make on the Macintosh. Instead of having one Macintosh, they soon have 40 different versions of the Macintosh, because those of you who have been in the consumer product business know that if you're having trouble making new products, you can just sort of create different versions of your product for different distribution channels. And so there was a Macintosh 3600 and the 3600C and the 3600CX and the 4600, and there were 40 of them. And Steve comes back and says, what are we doing? What are all these for? And they start trying to explain, well, Best Buy wants this in their channel, and we're doing this for this profit. And finally, he goes back to the simplified, to the focus. He goes to a whiteboard, and he just does a grid. And he puts on top home, office, desktop, laptop. 4 squares, that's it. We're just going to make 4 computers. And he gets rid of everything else, and they just do the famous four computers, the iMac, you know, the MacBook, etc. And then finally, when that restores the company to profit, that's in 1997, in about 4 years they're doing well, he takes the top 100 people at Apple on a retreat. And he says, now we have to focus on what we're going to do next. And for 3 days, they all fought to get on the first page of his whiteboard. There are about 100 suggestions of what to do. And at the end of the third day, he has the front page of the whiteboard, and they finally succeeded in listing 10 things. And Steve takes his marker and crosses out the bottom 7 and says, we have to focus. We can only do 3, which is why you have the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. So it was that sense of focus from both his, training in Eastern religions and this notion that simplicity is the ultimate beauty that really leads him. That's what he's learned by the time he comes back to Apple.
Well, you've all seen what an engaging conversationalist Walter can be. Unless people are dying with further curiosity about Steve Jobs, I really do want to engage him on a few others. He's written biographies of Einstein, of Henry Kissinger, whom I think many of us would be quite curious about here. In fact, the first Walter Isaacson book I read was actually co-authored with Evan Thomas, called The Wise Men, where he took 6 people from the 40s, essentially, who shaped, in many ways, America's post-World War II orientation. I wish, somebody would do something like that for 6 wise men from our country after independence. But I'd like to turn you to Henry Kissinger. Many of us here, of course, have had the pleasure of encountering Henry in various guises. But one of the things that many in India would be particularly curious about is his huge journey on India. I mean, in 1971, Henry starts off being this hugely hostile figure.
The tilt to Pakistan.
The tilt to Pakistan, the obscenities he uttered about Indira Gandhi on these
on the tapes, yeah.
And then 3 decades later, he is one of the biggest advocates of close American relations.
One of the odd things about Henry Kissinger is he's a brilliant man, and he has both an ego and a bit of an insecurity. So, like a moth to flame, he's attracted to his critics. If he's in a room and there's 100 people there, and 99 think he's the most brilliant person, and 1 thinks that he's bad, he will make a beeline to that 1 person and try to convince them. So ever since he got caught, basically, both with the tilt to Pakistan and the things he said about India, he has been part of the U.S., Aspen U.S., Aspen India strategic dialogue. He has been a great friend of India. I think there is something deeper, and maybe you can tell me because you've written about this, Shashi, in Henry Kissinger's transformation, which is back then, in the 70s, he and Nixon are playing off against each other and probably reinforcing the darker qualities of each other. But Henry Kissinger is not a strong believer in democracy as a great value. He believes it's messy, as it is, as America and India have both proven. He believes it's sort of sentimental to be fighting for democracy, and he's quite comfortable dealing with authoritarian regimes, whether it be in Pakistan or Chile or China or whatever. And so in that great struggle that's been there since Cardinal Richelieu and others who invent the notion of diplomacy 500 years ago, is the balance between realism, and idealism. And Kissinger was so far on the realism side that, he was on the German part of it, the realpolitik side, meaning don't get sentimental about values and ideals and democracy. And so I think there was that sense in him that India's democracy was messy and populist and non-aligned and all those sort of things. I think he has changed and he has evolved to understanding that there has to be a weaving of both ideals and interests when you do foreign policy, and that has made him appreciate India more. You're probably more of an expert on that than I am, but I sense that there's a depth of his philosophical evolution that goes beyond just feeling guilty about what he said on the tapes.
I'm sure you're right, Walt. I mean, I think certainly the big change is, of course, the end of the Cold War, because he saw India through the prism of the US-Soviet relationship, and he saw India, because of India's reflexive signing of that Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation with Moscow at a time when the US had had its opening to China through Pakistan, he saw India as essentially a Soviet asset. And I think
that was one of the great flaws of Kissinger's worldview early on, was seeing everything in the prism of the Soviet-American competition. And the great breakthrough, which India helps him figure out, is when he sees a triangular balance of China and Russia and the United States. That is not communist versus, the West. And using Pakistan to open to China also helps create a more sophisticated triangular diplomacy.
But Walter, except that I've reviewed his book on China last year, and while what you said, in fact, confirms what he tends to speak about in gatherings like this one, in the book he is much more uncritically supportive of China, talks about a special relationship. I mean, barely falls short of advocating a sort of G2 condominium between the US and China in a new Pacific relationship that seems to virtually supplant the old privileged Atlantic relationship of the post-World War II years. So it surprises me India barely gets a look in. And when it does, in his description of the India-China War of '62, his account is so completely pro-Chinese it takes the breath away. So I'm not quite sure how much
he
Henry has
pays
seen
lip
the light.
service. But the good thing about people who play lip service, I guess Shakespeare taught us that with Prince Hal, that you become the mask you wear. So perhaps Kissinger is becoming more open to India simply because he pays lip service to being so.
I hope so, unless we can get him. He's turning 90 next year, and get him to do a book on his views on India just to set the record straight.
Be careful of what you wish for.
Walter, we should talk about Einstein a bit. He had Walter did the definitive.
One of the greatest things Einstein did was with Bose. What's his first name?
Jagdish Chandra Bose.
Yeah. The great Indian physicist who basically helped...
The boson is named for it.
What?
The boson is named for it.
Sure. And the Einstein-Bose theory, or it should be Bose-Einstein, I guess, Bose-Einstein particle it's called, because Einstein has trouble getting over the hump of believing in quantum theory. Nobel Prize just went to two people who actually proved that quantum mechanics can be verified. But it's the Indian physicist who does help him there.
But tell us about Einstein beyond the science, because I certainly found his views on world politics, international peace, and so on very interesting. He was a great admirer of Gandhi.
Yeah.
He wanted to meet Gandhi and never did, as far as I know, right?
Right, but he always said, he always said that to be on the same planet with Gandhi helped ennoble your spirit.
Yeah, one of the most famous lines about Gandhi is an Einstein line that, what is it, generations to come may scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon the earth. Almost messianic in its language. But Einstein, at the same time, he was no Eastern spiritualist. But he did have spiritual beliefs, right? Didn't he say God doesn't pay us?
Well, he said when he was arguing against quantum theory, that which basically says that at the heart of the subatomic world is chance. I mean, it's probability. There's no certainty. He said, I cannot believe that God plays dice with the universe. He very much had a spiritual side, and he always explained it as saying there's a spirit manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit in the face of which we must be humbled and awed. He said the amazing thing about the universe is not, how come, it's the fact that there are laws that govern it, that we can discover, and this didn't need to be so. It could have just been a random universe, but instead it's beautiful in its laws. And he said he did not believe in a personal God, the type of God you could, pray to make sure the Redskins won, a football game or something. But in fact, he said, for some people, miracles are evidence of God's existence. But for me, it's the absence of miracles that are evidence of God's existence. It's the beauty of the laws that always hold in the universe, which, by the way, is why he got unnerved by the uncertainty inherent in quantum theory.
Right. And I think I owe you a fact check correction. It was Satyendranath Bose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not Jagdish Chandra Bose was another famous Bose.
Yeah.
But this one, they both have roads named for them in Calcutta, which is why I got it.
Right. Well,
I don't think we can let Walter off without talking about this year's big event in the U.S., the forthcoming presidential election. We follow it with great interest here, but obviously much less closely than you do. I was in the U.S. very briefly a couple of days ago and was startled by the extraordinary degree to which Obama's conduct in the first debate appeared to
I was
set him
stunned. I was watching that debate with a group of people, including a lot of Aspen trustees, and I was shell-shocked. I mean, halfway through the debate, I was having trouble watching it because he was so unsure, so uncommanding, so unlike Obama, the Obama that we know. And I don't think anybody can get it. And all sorts of people saying, but debates don't change anything. Well, this debate definitely changed things. It unsettled people. I do think that a week is a long time in politics, as Harold Wilson said. Nowadays, a day is a long time in politics. So
and you've got a month to go.
We have a month to go. And fundamentally, I think Obama's in a better place to win the election, but this will be talked about, for decades to come, about how somebody could just seem so uncomfortable and unsure at a debate when he knows exactly what he's doing.
Well, I mean, this is obviously of interest to all of us here because there would be a pretty dramatic change in governing philosophy if Obama were to lose. Do you have a sense of how Romney would feel about India or about...
Yeah, I mean, the problem, we get back to the idealism versus realism. Romney has not clearly defined himself as either, on the one hand, being a realist, in the Brent Scowcroft, Kissinger mold, or being either an idealist, or if you want to extend it further, a neoconservative who believes that you really assert values, including, go to war sometimes, not just because it's in your interest, but because you're going to do it for democracy or whatever. Bob Zellick, who many of you know, who's part of the Aspen Strategy Group, has been part of the U.S.-India dialogue. Obviously, you know everything about Bob Zellick. He is very much a realist. Very pragmatic, very much in the Brent Scowcroft.
Is he likely Secretary of State material?
Now, he was appointed by Romney to be in charge of the foreign policy transition. This caused an explosion among the people like Dan Senior and others who are more neoconservative. What it showed us is that Romney hasn't yet, even in the speech he gave yesterday, clarified which approach he would take. Obviously, it's not in his interest to clarify it, since the Republican Party, ever since Reagan was able to bring together the neoconservative wing with the George Shultz pure conservative wing, I would call it, the realist conservative wing, Reagan was able to put them all under one umbrella. They don't coexist naturally together very well. At our discussion in Aspen this summer, our former ambassador, Bob Blackwell, was there and debating against one of Romney's advisors because Blackwell, as you know, is very much of a realist school. So the question is whether the Blackwells, Scowcrofts, and Zellicks will be in charge, or whether you'll have a more, people that in the second George Bush term, the second George Bush presidency were more in charge.
Well, does he have a publicly expressed view on China that would help?
Yeah, he's been tougher. He thinks we should be tougher on China trade. I think he's saying that. Romney is somebody who said many things and flips-flops a lot because he was a moderate governor of Massachusetts and ran and won as a hardcore conservative. I'm not sure what he really believes on China, but he's been talking tough on China. And I think, and so is Obama, actually. It tends to help a little bit in a political season.
But you remember George W., when he was president, seem to have a vision of India as a counterweight to China, which is not something India particularly enjoys being for any third country. But I'm just curious as to whether that kind of thinking is still there in Romney circles.
I don't think so. Sorry.
No.
I mean, I think there's a really important relationship you could have with India, not as a counterweight to China, but as our natural ally, both in terms of values and interests in this region. And whether it comes to Afghanistan or Iran or China or anything else, and that's not entered into Romney's policy.
But coming back to the mechanics of the process, help us follow the next month. Which are the crucial states that we should be looking at in terms of...
Well, obviously Ohio, which has now gone back into play. It looked like Obama had Ohio, and now it's a close toss-up, and Romney, I think, is campaigning there right now. It's hard for Romney to win, it's hard for Romney to win without Ohio, but...
Is that the 2-minute warning?
And...
10-minute warning. Yeah. We have 10 minutes, go.
Oh, okay. Should we go to the audience then? Or?
Yeah.
I'm droning. That's it.
Ohio and Florida?
Ohio, Florida. Our home state for the Aspen summer campus, Colorado, will be interesting. But I think if you knew which way Ohio and Florida were going to go, and it's interesting because, I mean, who would have thunk 2 weeks ago? I mean, also, I don't watch cable TV much because everybody's bloviating like crazy and they're always wrong. But if you said 2 weeks ago, Obama, who had it locked up, I mean, it was like 80%, you know, in his favor on all the odds makers, had it locked up, and you were to say, within 2 weeks, unemployment will drop all the way down to 7.8%, we'll have a great jobs report, and Obama will have blown the debate and will therefore be in trouble, you'd say, well, that's wacky. So we have a wacky...
can happen.
By the way, as Kissinger would say, democracy is messy.
We've got time, about 10 minutes worth of questions from the audience, so I better put my glasses on and see any hands raised. Is there a hand coming up anywhere? Come. Walter has touched on so many different subjects. I'm sure that your curiosity levels are still high. Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions. And you know, I've been doing
way in the two at the table,
two at the back,
right
there. Can somebody take a handheld mic to the?
Or do I have the only handheld mic?
No, I think there is another one right there. Could you stand if you don't mind? Is that Madhav there? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
So one of the things that struck me about the Steve Jobs book, and we are so India-centric here that we take every subject back to how it applies to India. But one of the things that struck me about your book, that it could only happen in America. So not only is it, I think, just extraordinary prose about an extraordinary man, to me it was commentary on Silicon Valley. To me it was commentary on the uniqueness that seems to be California and a larger setting that what the extraordinary, the only nation founded on a good idea.
The purpose of the book, in a way, was to say, why did this happen here, and what could a country like India or other places, how do you develop that innovation? Because surely India is doing great in terms of turning out engineers and people who know math and science, but the question is imagination, innovation, and beauty. This should be a comparative strength of India because India has a great sense of beauty and poetry as well as a good sense of science and technology. And that was Steve's formula, was connecting the two to create imaginative things. I think, and I don't mean to preach to a group that knows India better than I do, you have to look at what is it India might be missing in terms of risk-taking, venture capital, an ability to be open to foreign direct investment and know the competition that must come from that. All of these things come from a type of Wild West almost economic feeling that was growing up in Silicon Valley, which is you can do whatever you want in your garage and venture capitalists will come by in gold convertibles and maybe invest in you, and then if you fail, maybe they'll bring you back. And I don't think that spirit exists. Frankly, it doesn't exist in parts of the United States, but you have to look at, and you know, a lot of people have been talking about the book in India, which pleases me, but I think you can look at the book and say, which of these elements are we missing in the type of economy that's somewhat more controlled and somewhat more rigid, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, that could allow for a Steve Jobs to rise. And secondly, the education system. I mean, you know, it's valuing the creativity and the imagination too.
Yes, that other hand there. Yep.
Hi, my name is Akshat. I'm a fellow of the Aspen Institute,
Akshat.
third class. With your wealth of knowledge of the world, especially from the US perspective, do you think that would you be interested in going and actually talking about India, with maybe doing a biography of someone in India, or having a commentary on India? Because I kind of missed that. We've talked about, I probably missed a little bit of talking about Walter Isaacson.
I love writing about creativity and intelligence and how they intersect, which is not always. I mean, some of the most intelligent people you know are not very creative and don't amount to much. And so that's sort of the theme I've written about. I think there are lots of books to be done about India in that regard. It is just not a field that's my particular expertise. I'm going to be writing my next book, which I hope takes me a very long time, I'm in no hurry, on the birth of the digital age and around the world, how people, almost to answer the first question, what is it that causes the computer, the internet, the microchip, various things to catch on, and who invents them? What type of imagination does it take?
I bet you better sell that online. It may need updating.
It's right. Well, it's going to be historical. I'm going to start with
Can you bring the mic to the front?
Ada Byron Lovelace, back in the 1830s, Lord Byron's daughter.
What fun. NK.
Hello, NK.
You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Walter, is that I've been reading some pieces by my good friend Martin Wolf in the Financial Times, quoting the sort of prognosis in the next decade or so of what lies in store for the world. And what the conclusions they come to is that there is no great frontier of technology or innovation which is in the horizon, which can dramatically alter total factor
Yeah, but that's
productivity.
totally wrong. I mean, I think, now, obviously, Mr. Wolf is more well-versed.
Mr. Wolf is quoting research work done in the United States.
I think that the biotechnology revolution that will come from not only understanding the sequencing of the human genome, but proteins, RNA, protein folding, whatever, will totally transform the world of medicine and biotechnology in ways that will be as big as the information technology revolution was in the past 50 years. And it will take a different type of mindset. You will not be able, in your parents' garage, to start a biotech. It's going to take clusters where there's hospitals and healthcare and things like that. But I do think that combined with big data, once we have everybody's genetic sequencing and know all the data, and we can mine that data and do things, you will have a combination of the biotech revolution and the infotech revolution that will make a new frontier that in some ways I think will be even bigger than the information technology revolution. But in 40 years, if I'm wrong and Mr. Wolf is right, you can...
No, I think that most of us here would like to share your optimism.
May I ask a question about what's happening in the West Asian region? I mean, you got Libya and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, and now Israel is threatening Iran. And it doesn't seem as if the Americans are doing too much about it or wish to do too much about it. And from our standpoint over here, it seems to be quite an explosive and completely unpredictable situation. And the consequences are equally unpredictable for the whole world. And what would be your take on that?
That's a broad topic. Ever since my daughter was born, I think the United States has been involved militarily in occupying parts of Muslim countries. That's been 20 years or so. So I don't know that that's a trend that needs to continue. So I think a little bit more humility in terms of American foreign policy when it comes to dealing with the Middle East and the Muslim world is probably called for. The problems of the Arab Spring, or now the Arab Winter, alas, is that it falls right into what we were talking about before. When our interests and our ideals align, it's pretty easy to know what to do. And maybe Libya was such a case. But whether it's Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, even Egypt, and certainly Kuwait, Qatar, other places, sometimes our democratic ideals don't align perfectly with our security interests. So it's going to be a messy, case-by-case thing. I was talking here to your ambassador from Israel, and Iran, you know, it looks like in the past few weeks things have calmed down a bit, but that's a tough, not easily solvable problem. I do not know, you know, how you make that one get solved. I do think that there are problems that are more solvable. I actually think that both the Israelis and the Palestinians, who are really both very smart people, could come to a conclusion on how to get to a two-state solution, even though it's tough. But I'm not somebody who believes that the United States should be getting militarily more involved, given the messiness in the region.
Vikram? Oh, sorry, is the mic there? Go ahead, okay. Whoever's got the mic.
Walter, Partha, I spoke to you about Steve earlier. It's nobody's case that for years to come, the US is going to be the world leader in innovation. But growth is predicated on innovation and energy. And God's been very kind to you guys because you have all the shale gas in the world you require.
Yeah.
And you're soon going to be an energy exporter. Then perhaps,
You might even join OPEC.
Or even join OPEC. So you guys aren't going to be quite as, let me put it this way, you don't have to be as solicitous of the needs of the Saudis and others as you have been in the recent past. Tell me, has anyone visualized, or how do you visualize a strengthened US instead of everyone saying a diminished US, which not only is technology-wise the leader, but is sitting pretty with energy surpluses?
Yeah, I think the third component for America to remain strong would be to improve its education system, which used to be the best in the world and is now approximately the 20th best. So we will never be a great power in the future if we can't fix education. When it comes to energy, I do think that it will be interesting how this changes the entire geopolitical landscape. I grew up in Louisiana, a very energy-rich state. So I know about the curse of energy resources. It tends to make for bad politics. It tends to make for, from Venezuela to Saudi Arabia to any place that has a lot of oil. Tom Friedman has written about it. There's a pretty direct correlation between having oil and having messed up governments. I think having the U.S. no longer dependent on oil from around the world like that will help change the equation for the better and probably help settle things in the Middle East a bit. And I would hope that not only is it shale and natural gas, which is very abundant, but that becomes a bridge to renewable energies as well.
The mic has traveled to the back. Is there someone there with the mic? Yes, please.
Walter. Oh, dear.
Hi.
Hi. You've biographed a lot of people. You've had a chance to look at them up close and personal. And they're all variety of people. Any moment in time while writing about them or looking at their lives, did you come across a circumstance in their life, a story of their life that shook your own value and belief system?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. There are things about Steve Jobs in particular didn't necessarily shake my belief system, but it made me question what's valuable and how we lead our lives. Because Steve was enormously successful in many aspects of his life, but he was not very successful at a pretty simple thing that you and I can do just as well as a genius like Steve, which is being nice. And I realized when we, in New Orleans, and KIPP academies came in, we started schools, we wanted to have a simple value system. And we came down to just 2 rules, which was work hard, be nice. And I realized at times that people were reading my book and saying, oh, I'm kind of like Steve. I'm tough on everybody. I can be a real jerk at times. And I think, no, that's not the lesson here. The lesson here is you want to be inspiring, you want to be innovative, you want to be a genius like he was at times. But you don't necessarily need to connect that to being unkind. And so I've tried to focus on that value and people who have it and people who don't.
Okay, has the mic come back? I think Vikram's been waiting for it here. Is there anyone else?
I try to give shorter answers.
Have you got the mic here?
Food.
Although you got the mic there,
yes,
sorry.
And I have a question.
Okay.
This question is in 2 parts. The first part, Einstein, Kissinger, Steve Jobs.
I left out Benjamin Franklin as well.
Seemingly very different people.
Yeah.
Were they really very different from your understanding?
No, the 3 of them have in common one particular thing, which is they defy conventional thinking. As Steve Jobs would say, they think different. They think out of the box. You know, for Einstein, everybody had read the first paragraph of Newton's Principia, which says that time marches along second by second, irrespective of how we observe it. And Einstein can't get a job as a professor. He can't get his doctoral dissertation accepted by the Zurich Polytech. He's a 3rd-class examiner at the Swiss Patent Office. But he's looking at clocks in distant cities that need to be synchronized because the Swiss, you know, being Swiss people, or rather Swiss, they wanted to strike 7 in Bern the exact same moment it strikes 7 in Zurich. And he's realizing that the signal travels at the speed of light, and somebody traveling really fast one way will see clocks synchronized differently than somebody traveling really fast the other way. And so that simple willingness to question Newton's assumption and think different causes him to say, oh, well, the speed of light is always constant because time is relative, depending on your state of motion. And that's all special relativity is, which is a 3rd-class patent clerk not doing any experiments, but just sitting on the stool and thinking different. And I think you can go through each of the people in the books that I've written and see over and over again they question the conventional wisdom. I mean, Steve, at the end of his life, we were talking about, you know, this ad that he helped write, the Think Different ad, and it was, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the round pegs in the square holes, those who think different, because those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And he's reciting that to me on his sickbed, and he's crying as he says it. I mean, it was so ingrained in him to think of himself as a rebel who thought different. And, you know, his own mantra was from the back of the Last Whole Earth catalog, stay hungry, stay foolish. So if there's a theme among all of these people, it's not that they were smart, because as I said, smart people are a dime a dozen. They don't always amount to much. But that they were creative and they thought different.
Great. Okay, I think we'll have the last question from Vikram here.
Thank you, sir.
Vikram?
I just wanted to ask, just to cast our eyes on the future for a moment, your books, particularly your book on Kissinger and your book on Steve Jobs, was it basically 2 different kinds of examples of the way forward? One is a society based on innovation, a society based on creating a regulatory framework and allowing innovation to take place within that. And a second is a society based on control, organization, discipline, and replication within that. What, looking forward, would you see as an example that would work in terms of political economy for developing states in Asia and Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the question, but with a caveat, which is the reason I write history I'm not very good at being a future predictor, so I like to write about the past. That said, that is the great question facing geopolitics in the world today, which is the tightly organized, structured way or a way that celebrates innovation. And I think it comes down to looking at an information age, and that includes a biotech information age as well as a information technology information age, that the free flow of information is inevitable. And that there are certain countries in this world that are comfortable with debate, ideas, the free flow of information, even if, as in the case of India, there's sort of a structured economy that, in my mind, seems a little bit too structured compared to the creativity of the Indian mindset. But in the end, if you have the free flow of information and the free flow of ideas, and you're comfortable, as the United States is from the days that Thomas Paine was handing out pamphlets in colonial America, and the way India is with its free press, free discussion, free democracy, free debate, you will inevitably bend the arc of history towards individual empowerment. It can be messy. Tahrir Square is an example of it being messy. It bends the arc of history, and the Muslim Brotherhood comes in and bends it back. But in the end, if you allow the free flow of ideas, information, you empower people, and thus you end up having a freer political system, because people will want say in the rules, and a freer economic system, because it's harder to have a command and control system or authoritarian system when you don't control the free flow of information. I think that's a big difference between China and India, is that in its DNA, India is tolerant of different ethnic groups, as I said earlier to somebody. You know, when I was here as a journalist, I remember covering somebody who was born a Roman Catholic woman, Sonia Gandhi, running against a Hindu prime minister and winning and stepping aside for a Sikh who was sworn in by a Muslim president. This is something the rest of the world can learn from, because in a messy democracy, you end up having to have a certain tolerance. And that happens, too, in an information age with the of innovation and technology and information flow. Having too highly of a structured economy that doesn't let as much innovation bubble up as possible will just not be sustainable, especially in a democracy. So there is a condominium of interests, in my mind, between the United States and India, based on the notion of a pluralistic society that understands the importance of tolerance in a democracy, connected to the notion of free flow of information and ideas, leading to more openness, both in terms of the politics but also the economy. Thank you all.
I think that means Kissinger loses that particular contest. But let's give Walter a round of applause, everyone.
Closing words, go. Walter, Shashi, thank you very much. I think the silence from the audience when you were speaking, I'm glad we gave you the full Indian experience, the call to prayer, the urban railroad going by with the special horn for you.
Tie in the Muslim call to prayer with the state-owned railway and all the sounds. But I couldn't make the metaphor work.
And you don't know, we got the power of this messy democracy behind making sure it all happened just when you were about to speak. But thank you very much. I think that was absolutely fascinating. I don't think I want to hold anybody back from what I hope will be a scrumptious dinner. But ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking Walter Isaacson and Shashi Tharoor.
Very good. Come on.